created the Coloured Man's Institute thereafter in Newham.
So you call a name, and then when you've done that, after you've exhausted names, I have some names here on the list that we would want to remember. All right, so you remember a name that you reckon deserve a memory. It could well be a great-grandfather, a great-grandmother, great-great, you know, this is something that you want to do in remembrance of these ancestors. All right, is there a name you want to call?
Yeah. Errol Barrow, a Barbadian. He later became Prime Minister of Barbados.
Errol Barrow, that's important. I think he served in the war, didn't he?
Yeah.
He served in the First World War.
1907.
And he came back to be Prime Minister. Okay, anybody else would want to?
Yes, Norman Manley from Jamaica.
Norman Manley from Jamaica, yes, he served. That's the man I was trying to talk about from Jamaica. He became an important man in the government as well. Do you want to address the audience?
William Bailey, the daughter of soldier of 1914 to 18 war. He served in France.
This is your father?
I've got his medals and lots of other things in memory of him.
Thank you very much.
I am the daughter
Yeah.
of a soldier of 1914 to 18 war. And he served between England and France.
Okay, that sounds very good. Thank you very much. Anybody else come and say a name, and there we are. Okay.
Walter Tull, footballer and soldier in World War I.
And captain.
I'm captain, yes. Want to be an officer?
I would like to say Norman Manley again because he was very active in politics while I was at school in the 60s in Jamaica.
All right, thank you.
Austin Augustus Rogers, who served in both World War Wars. He was my grandfather.
Thank you. Think of a name. Doesn't have to be somebody who was outstanding in the war, but just, it doesn't have to be, yeah.
Jamaican Roger Mays.
Roger Mays. Okay. All right.
You could just place it and make full name silently if you want.
Yeah, or even
Dr.
if...
Arthur Wint from Jamaica.
Indeed, yes.
He was not only an athlete, but he was also ambassador, diplomat to Sweden.
Indeed. That is quite true. Thank you.
All the Caribbean soldiers.
All the Caribbean soldiers, that sounds very good. Thank you.
More than that for
All right. All these candles. All right.
Clara George of Dominica. She wasn't in the war, but she worked in hospitals in England for many years, and she died this week. That's my aunt, by the way.
Thank you.
This is not a family member, but it's for Nanny of the Maroons
Yes.
in Jamaica, who played a very significant part in the uprising that led to the release of the slaves under
Thank you.
British rule.
He representing my family.
Okay, that's all right.
For people of African descent in the Caribbean, for their endurance and strength.
Okay, thank you.
I don't have a name in particular, just everyone that contributed.
Okay. There's a candle here. They're not lit.
Dr. Drew, beside who separated plasma from blood during the First World War, and that made it easy for blood transfusion to happen.
Very good. That's right. That's right. Okay, now, yeah, okay, now I'm going to read a few names. Some of you might know these names. The first name, he's still alive, Sam King. Second World War, still alive. We have Cy Grant. He's no longer with us, but we're hoping to do a project on about his life and times. Oswald Denniston, he was called Columbus. Those of you might remember the name. He was from the Windrush. Another person by the name of Albert Alphonse, he's passed away. We have Harold Simpson, he's passed away as well, at RAF Windrush as well. Vin Edwards, he's still around. He lives in the Wimbledon area. We have Dee Bowen, he's still with us. We have Mr. Mosley, I don't think he's with us. Mr. Rick Wharton, we have Mr. Webby, he's called. We have Mr. Coates, he's passed away. We have Cecil Holness, he is not with us. We have V. Dezzoni, well, he's still alive. Dezzoni is the father of an outstanding pilot who became an RAF Commodore, which is a very high position. That's Dezzoni. We have Connie Mark. Some of you might remember Connie Mark. Connie Mark was from Jamaica, and she was in the ATS. She was serving as a secretary, both in Jamaica and in the UK, because they had different, roles as an ATS in the army. We have Mr. Williams, Mr. Hilton, Mr. Wright, Nervin McCoy. Now, Nervin McCoy is still alive. He lives in near the Heathrow, that area. We have John Richards. He's still alive. He's around the age 90. He's a gentleman who is standing on the Windrush deck. The three men who are well dressed. John Richards is on the right. These guys are well dressed, standing on the deck. Vince Reed. He was one of the youngest on the ship. He was about 14 when he came. Eventually, Vince became a lecturer in Brixton. We have Houghton Christian. He's no longer with us. We have A. Gibson. He's still alive. We have Mr. Hudson. We have Lee, Mr. Lee. There's Alan. He's with us today. George Mason. He's still around. He's over 90. He lives in Oxford. And not long ago, he was a councillor in the Oxford area. This is how these Windrush people do their thing. Collins, he was a gentleman, when you look at the Windrush pictures, gentleman who, in his pajamas. That was the one caught in his pajamas in the deep shelter. Then we have Harold Phillips. He's no longer with us. He was called Lord Woodbine. He was the one who helped the Beatles to learn syncopation. The Beatles, after all, these men, John Lennon and Paul McCartney, didn't know how to play black music. They had to learn. And the person who helped them to learn syncopation, to learn even the steel band, was Harold Phillips or Woodbine, Lord Woodbine from Trinidad. That kind of story is not told, but we're having a memorial for Lord Woodbine in January, and we'll invite you. We have the children who will be coming to talk about him and about the experience with the Beatles and so on. Although he was almost written out of history, but you can't write people out of history that easy. And we're going to talk about him as such. And the last name to call, but not least, is Norma Best, who is still with us. She's 92, Norma Best, which is very important. So those are the names we need. Yeah, we mentioned you at least twice.
My brother.
Oh, of course. So why should I forget? That's right. That was right. That's Harold, or Harry. Harry was a member of the Southlanders with his brother here, Alan. And there are others that I haven't mentioned, but time is going, and we need to get on with the program.
Okay, if you'd like to take a seat, then I'm going to ask Mrs. Bailey to come to the front and show. She's been 5 minutes to just show you. She's going to share with you the things that she has from home.
Yeah, we were very privileged to have had Mrs. Bailey, who really, inspired us by talking about her father in the First World War, and we really want to have these memories. One thing about our people, tend not to want to remember, or we don't remember the ancestors, right? Now, if it wasn't for them, we wouldn't be here. All the ancestors, not just grandmother, grandfather, you know. What about the earliest grandmother after 1838, for example? What about finding her? And it's possible to find her. We have the ways to finding their ancestors that go back to 1838, 1818. In fact, even 1814, when the first register was actually compiled in Trinidad. It's called the Slave Register, right? We can show you how to do that. That's it. Yeah, okay. Now, while Mrs. Bailey is having her memorabilia to be shown, and this is great stuff because we want the lottery to know that, you know, we are keen to remember our ancestors. We are keen to celebrate.
First of all, there's my parents.
Come in front now. And
There's my parents. My father, Arthur Theophilus Campbell. And he served in the 1914 war. He used to sit us down and tell us everything that he experienced. I have got his medals here. It's really free. It's a bit tatty. It is 1940. It was really free, but they had kept one in Jamaica so that one could claim that she could get some allowance. And this has been around during the early decades, but I managed to hold on to these two. Also, along with that, there's a thank you signed by King George IV.
King George.
That was given to my father. And my mother kept all these things. These handed on to us and to the grandchildren, and probably great-grandchildren. Even though I'm so proud to know that I'm the daughter of an ex-soldier, and that I'm in this country, which I have the lot of benefits, and my children. So each time I look at my father's photographs on the wall, it brings back a memory. And I share it with other schools and all over different organizations. Father Theophilus Campbell.
Okay, thank you.
I want to hand over to Jenny for a moment now. Jenny works
Okay,
here at the library.
I'm not part of the organisation. I actually work for the London Borough of Newham in their archives. And one of my passions is not only those who served in the First World War, but also doing family history and genealogy. And one of that, part of that, was in an exhibition for, because of the fact that primarily the soldiers you're focusing on are from the who were serving in regiments in either Africa or the Caribbean. But there were also soldiers and sailors who were born here in Newham who served. And they would have been in Essex regiments, because this was Essex, not London. Okay? And to point that out, this is Daddy, Mr. Braithwaite, who came here as a sailor, and he had a little toddler, and that toddler was in the First World War. So he is mixed race. And then you've got Anderson family, he's also mixed race. Then you have, and I wanted to show this because of the fact that people have assumptions about things, but you've got to remember, wherever there's water, Topsters, Bristol, Cardiff, there's going to be those people who were born here, grew up here, and as one sailor said, Sidney Graham, who is still alive but he has dementia, when he went to Barbados, he'd never been there before in his life. But then when he landed, because he was torpedoed, he found this wealth of family that he never knew existed. Okay, so that's where it's coming back and forth. This couple here, who's mixed race? Now you're thinking, doesn't mixed race. But you know something? That melanin can jump in and out when it feels like. And I think that's what we have to understand with our history. Okay, so that's why these panels are here. And I thought I needed to explain it. Because technically, it isn't part of what they're doing here, but it does show you, in terms of the First World War, some of the anomalies that people don't realise and have the assumption that all those who served were, if they were of colour, then they were, like Walter Tull, for instance, he was born in Bethnal Green. Do you understand what I mean? Because of that. Because of how the water affects these communities, you get families like this born here. Okay, let's just make it very short.
So this is the presentation now. So if I set, so this is us, Cheryl, and this is Lisette. So we're going to do a bit of a double act here on doing the presentation. Because we were given a brief to do some research on Caribbean contribution to World War I. So this presentation isn't a big learning piece, it's just a step because we're sort of part way through the research, and this is just to kind of show you what we've found out so far, and then also ask you for your help back to help us to develop the end of the project. So this isn't the end, this is sort of like step one. So this is the first presentation we're doing after the launch. So this is an image that was used in the publicity. I'm going to start with a quote, because the first thing I started to read when we were doing this was this book by Glenford Howe, and it's called Race, War and Nationalism. This is actually his thesis, but it's a very, very good read. And this is a quote from this book. The first British military operation of World War I was launched from the Gold Coast against Germany's colony in Tobago Island. And that's an image that I found that referenced it on Wikipedia on that first day of the campaign just over 100 years ago. So then I had to find out, well, where is all the information? Where is all the information? So I've had a look at the British Library. There is a lot of stuff there. The National Museum, Imperial War Museum, Senate House, the West India Committee.
Can you speak a little louder now? Can you shout? Because I think there's a fan or something not interfering with the sound. So you got to shout out.
And what's going to happen on our website, we're going to have a list of all the resources, because there are a lot. I didn't want to sort of bore the slide and put them all up there, but you'll be able to access, and I'm going to try and put all in one place, everything that I've found on the website. And our website, which will be launched today by this good man. Can you want to stand up for a second? This is Roderick, who's building our site for us. And so you can have a little chat at the end. So I just thought I'd introduce Roderick. So the site is all spanking new and it's being developed, so bear with us whilst that's being developed as well. Also what happened was a little bit of sort of training, if you like, where an individual I took to the British Library, went through the membership process, and then was taken through how to navigate your way, because the British Library's got an immense amount of resources in there. So how do you start when you want to look? So the first thing I did was took some bits and pieces out of this, because Glenford refers to a lot of newspaper articles from the Caribbean. So I wrote down his reference in here, ordered it online, went to the British Library. When I got there, they were sitting there waiting for me to have a look at. So I got to see the actual newspapers where he referred to certain articles about the war. Some of them are really good read. And if anybody's interested in having a go or being shown how to do it, I'm happy to show you. Because part of this project brief is to help community members be able to do their own research. And then you don't have to do the wrong one, you can actually put your family name into the archive and find out whether your ancestors or parents or relatives were written about in the newspapers or any other books and documents that were written about. This one's a set.
picture of West Indian troops. They're stacking shells and they're in Ypres in Belgium. So this was where a lot of the fighting actually took place. And this was October 1917. They were engaged in numerous support roles on the Western Front, and their roles could include digging trenches, or it could be building roads or being stretcher bearers if someone was injured, they would stretch them off. It could be gun emplacements and loading ships and ammunition. So in July 1917, 13 of the men were killed by shell fire, and Field Marshal Douglas Haig said their work had been arduous, and has been carried out almost continuously under shell fire. In spite of casualties, the men have always shown themselves willing and cheerful workers, and their assistance has been much appreciated by the unions to which they have been attached, whom they've been working. The physique of these men is exceptional, their discipline excellent, and their morale high. So they did get a lot of praise. This was while they were on the Western Front. West Indian soldiers weren't just on the Western Front, they were also sent to Palestine and to Egypt, and this is them in Palestine. They were mostly in support roles here, such as guarding prisoners and holding reserve posts, but by, say, about 1916, they were also allowed more in combats rather than just support roles. So there was discrimination. A lot of it was more kind of amongst the troops, and it was about stereotypes of race and class. So a senior said, as long as they were soldiering, it meant bands and uniforms and a certain element of mild heroism, all was well. But when it meant smartness, neatness, and above all punctuality, I think the West Indian knows but slightly. And again, not answering back, for he loves to argue, it was not so well. There was too much of rules, as it was put. So this shows kind of the stereotypes that some of the seniors had of the West Indian men, that they don't know how to be on time and they answer back too much. So this was some of the kind of prejudice that was seen.
Again, whilst looking at this is from Kew, the archives there, started to find people and their stories. So I apologise for the clarity, but I'll put the actual scan of the document on the website so you can blow it up and have a look and have a read. But Private O. Johnson was a soldier who was deemed to be a lunatic by their description. And they didn't know what to do with him. So this letter is basically back and forth where they had him in Sierra Leone in a lunatic asylum there, and they wanted to repatriate, if you like, him back to Jamaica, but nobody wanted to pay for him and his keep because it cost to keep him. So this letter is basically asking what to do about the disposal of this man. So that's, and there are several letters that go back and forth. This is an example of one. So these are sort of the stories that you see when you dig into the records about our people, but you wouldn't necessarily know that that was a Caribbean gentleman unless you sort of read into it or you knew that man to be Caribbean. Mrs. Mortley, now her letters, and there's several of them, she lost her husband in the war, and she's left with her son, and she wants to be repatriated, but it would appear that she wants to, I think, either stay here or in America, but they want to send her to Jamaica. She doesn't want to go there, so there's this back and forth of letters about what to do for her, to find her passage, who's going to pay for it, but also she's making a claim for her husband's pension, which they won't give her. So there's stories behind what happens to people when they die in service, what happens to their family, how do they get get looked after. These are all what I call interesting questions as to what happens to our soldiers and our people. Because it wasn't just the men, there were women there. She travelled with her husband during the war. So these are two of the interesting stories so far that I have there.
One of the most interesting stories I come across was the Sleaford strikes in October 1915. The strike was led by an ex-policeman and engineer called Henry Somerset. He was a Guyanese man, and him, along with several other ringleaders from Trinidad, they striked over bad conditions and late payment. They refused to turn up for parade and wrote in chalk, "No money, no work." A colonel described the men as being ignorant of discipline in a letter to the governor of Guyana. However, he was really lenient towards the men because he could have charged them of conspiracy to cause mutiny, but instead of just repatriated them. News of this kind of went back to the West Indies, and when Somerset arrived in Guyana on the 5th of November, he was interviewed by a paper there, and he claimed that he was repatriated just for having spoke for his rights, and that the officers that had treated them really kindly locally, as soon as they got overseas, they changed their attitude towards them. He said it was poor quality, there was inadequate amount of food, and whenever they would complain, they would receive insults. And he said that many of the men were just too faint-hearted to speak for their rights. So that was kind of the most interesting story I found. I've had to do a bit more research into Henry Somerset.
This was also an interesting find. It's a letter from Marcus Garvey to the War Office in support of the war and how he's going to have the Africa he's encouraging them to support the war effort, and he backs the king. So you'll be able to kind of see this as well. But obviously what's happened with the passage of time, as we all know, Marcus Garvey has definitely grown and changed his mind as to what he thought. But in the beginning, as a young, fresh and patriotic man, we see here where he has written, and there's letters before this where they want to introduce him to the committee, and then here's his letter being presented to the committee. And then you see a letter which is the response to this letter, that Marcus Garvey is going to encourage all Jamaicans to support Britain. So there were themes that I started to pick up on, or we started to pick up on, that are so far coming out in these documents. And these, I guess, are themes that appeal to my sensibilities rather than a kind of historical army piece. This is more about people. So what were the recruitment strategies? You see a lot of that in the British Library and the newspapers, where what they tended to do was appeal to the women, to make the women make their men, or try to encourage their men to feel like this. So there was a very big sort of strain on gender, and for women to make their men, or persuade their men to be manly and join the war, as well as donate their sons to the war. So there's lots of rhetoric in the papers about don't let your sons hide under your petticoats, and things like that, that are actually in the papers where they're trying to just get all the men to join up. And then what we want to know is the treatment of people once they've been recruited. And as we've heard here, that there was a strike, so we didn't just go along and do it. There were sort of differences in treatment. Certain groups were treated different to others. As Arthur said earlier, the Caribbean and African men always went unarmed. So what effect did that have on them whilst they were in the war? Then also something that I found as well was this separation allowance. So technically, if somebody's married and had children or dependents, there was supposed to be a sum of money given to the families. But as we know, a lot of the families would have been illegitimate at the time, so there was this big thing about